Right, thank you. I have just been told that we are live, so we'll get this one started. Uh, let's see. Good afternoon, good morning, and greetings appropriate for any other time of the day from wherever you are logging in. This is the second part of the masterclass from Professor Subhashis Banerjee on the topic of electronic voting as part of the blockchains and electoral democracy project at Karana. Uh, even though you may be joining this one for the first time, I think we would recommend that you watch both sessions together to get a better introduction to the topic. And because in isolation, it might be difficult to sort of understand and appreciate the amount of detail that has been covered across both these sessions. A few housekeeping notes before I hand it over to our host and moderator, Smar McCarthy. We will be streaming this on YouTube. You can put questions on the YouTube chat or here, and we will be presenting it to our host and the speaker. You can use the raise hand function in Zoom to queue up your questions or remarks. If you prefer not to use the raise hand function, you can always put them in chat. We'll read them out for you. And yes, I think with that, there's no need to, for me at least, to go in a whole lot of ornate introductions. I'll hand it over to Smari, and with that, he can take it forward. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we're back. It's another week, and we are continuing with our discussion about electronic voting systems. So I'm just going to keep it short so that we can get down to the actual meat of the matter. But in case you missed it last time, I do agree that it's a good idea to go back and watch the YouTube stream from last time. It was quite informative. But again, we have with us Professor Subhashis Banerjee, who teaches at the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi, and he's been involved in writing and educating and commenting on the intersection of technology and society and politics. And so what we're here to do today is dig a little bit deeper into the specifics of how to make these kinds of electronic voting systems reliable, if at all possible. This is not necessarily an easy thing to do. As we went through last time, there are many things that need to be guaranteed in order to make it all work. So hopefully we'll all emerge from this more enlightened than we go into it. So I'll just hand it over to you, Subhashis.
Right. Thanks, Marty. So let me start with sharing my screen. Okay, and okay. So what I'll start with electoral rolls today and do the voting part later. Because as a computer scientist, I would think that if I have to attack an election system, I would attack the electoral rolls rather than the voting system. Electoral, the voting system is under public scrutiny. It's sort of out there for everybody to see. Whether electoral rolls are something that can be attacked at leisure, much before the election, and just 1% swing, deleting 1% voters, unwanted voters from the electoral rolls, is enough to hack an election, closely contested election. So there was a, when we did this CCE report on elections, there was this wonderful report by, and sort of astonishing report by V. Ramani and Harsh Mandar, which talked about the disenfranchisement of the voters, right? So apparently, voters from the marginalized communities, they find it hard to get onto the voting list, and they also find it hard to stay on the voting list. Right? So once they're on, they tend to get deleted, um, and without notice, without necessarily following the rules, and they go to the polling station and figure out their names are simply not there. So and in India, probably in other places also, there are no standards about maintenance of the electoral rules, right? The integrity of the electoral rules. And some people are saying now that the electoral rule should be on blockchain. And that is what maybe I'll address a little bit in this talk. Now, in this talk, I will have to get into a little bit of cryptography, as I mentioned last time. So if there is any difficulty at any point of time, please don't hesitate to just interrupt. Right? Just unmute yourself and interrupt. Okay, so democracy principles demand that the integrity of electoral roll should be publicly verifiable, and they seldom are. Right? So the electoral roll is usually downloadable from the ECI website in India, but they are not in a searchable form. They are typically given as images, and to do anything with them is sort of impossible. They are also not properly RTI-able, so you cannot do an RTI, file an RTI to ask the question that why was my name deleted, or why was my address not updated. You'll be lucky if you get any answers. So what are the verifiability requirements typically? That all applications for inclusion and updates on the electoral rolls by the voters or on their behalf, they should be correctly processed. That there should be no spurious deletions from the electoral rolls without notice and without citing reasons. And of course, deduplication of an electoral roll is a crucial issue. Right? But this is not all. I mean, this is something that probably technology can address, but technology can't even address the problem of proactively identifying all eligible voters, the inclusion problem, right? So the person on the road, the person who sleeps on the street, the LGBTQ community persons. So this is a social process to get people onto the electoral roll proactively, even if they don't apply. That's a process that computer science probably cannot even address. So we will talk about the middle part, the verifiability requirement. And electoral roll attacks are not a myth, right? So there's these two reports that I read that came out roughly about the same time in March 2019. That talked about manipulation of electoral rolls in two countries very, very far apart on the other side of the earth. And these are, I would recommend that you read both to understand the kind of attacks that go on. Right? And they're not dissimilar. One is a highly advanced country and one is Telangana. And yet the nature of the attacks are very similar. Okay. So, the solution that I have in mind, and this is not a standard solution, this is something that I just thoughts, random thoughts that have occurred to my mind, unpublished stuff, but this is a proposal that we can discuss, right? So I think that, the cryptographic tool that we can use is a tool that came much, much before blockchain. It predates blockchain by at least 20 years. And it's pretty well understood in computer science, and it's a concept of an append-only public bulletin board, right? And it has two properties. One is certified published, that anybody can determine that who has published the bulletin. It's an append-only bulletin board, and sub-authority of ECI. So we are assuming here that only the Election Commission of India will publish, or their sub-authorities, and the identity can be verified. And the time of publication up to a certain bound, maybe within 5 minutes, within 10 minutes, the time of publication can be specified, can also be determined. And the append-only public bulletin board must have an unalterable history. And what does it mean? So this is called immutable in the language of blockchain, or non-repudiable. So this shows that any reader can verify that at times T1 and T0, T1 greater than T0, the board at T0 is a prefix of the board at T1, which means that nothing has got deleted and or altered, but something has got added. Right? As time progresses, things can only get added. That's the append-only property. And failure to determine either will indicate malfeasance on the part of the Election Commission of India or corruption. Right. So this is a notion of a public bulletin board. It's a very well understood cryptographic system that is probably 30, 40 years old. Right? So I'm suggesting that you should, for electoral rolls, have two bulletin boards. A bulletin board, first one is a bulletin board of transaction records. And this should contain the sequence of all enrollment applications received and enrollment records generated by the registration offices. Right? So this is enrollment and also all change and deletion requests. So any request that has got generated in the system must be put up on the bulletin board in a way that it cannot be altered. And any processing that has been done on those applications with reasons given. Right. So this is the bare minimum that you require to make it auditable. Right. So, and this has to be unalterable. Once done, it's done. Right. So you cannot go back on. And the second one is derived from the first one, is a bulletin board of electoral. So this is contained self-contained bulletin board of the entire electoral roll, updated with all additions, deletions, and changes till date, append only, where each entry is timestamped and digitally signed by a competent authority in the ECI. Who has added that thing on the bulletin board, who has deleted that thing on the bulletin board, and linked to the first bulletin board. So the current electoral roll can be computed publicly from the second bulletin board, right? So anybody should be able to compute the electoral roll, and this is constituency wise. So every constituency should maintain its own bulletin board. The blockchain proponents are, suggest something like that. They say that they think of the bulletin board as a blockchain. Now, the blockchain is a hammer that has many, many other things other than a bulletin board. The bulletin board is a part of it. And I would argue that those additional things may sometimes make the problem more complicated and actually add insecurity to the thing. I'll come and discuss that a little bit in more detail. So the cryptographic building blocks that you require to build a bulletin board are just two. Right? It's a very simple construct. So all you require is a digital signature, public key based signing system. So where sign and verify are two public functions. And a message can be signed with the secret key. That's the secret key. So the message can be signed with the secret key. And the signed signature is S. And given the message and the S, anybody can verify. Anybody who has the public key of the signing authority can verify that that this is indeed the signature of that message, and the message has not been altered. So that's a standard notion of a digital signature. And the second notion that we require is a hash function. A hash function is, so you've got a message, hash function is H, and you get a small h, which is called a hash. And a hash function is a one-way function, which means that it is easy to go from the message to the hash, but given the hash, it is almost impossible to find the message, to construct the message. So you can go one way, you cannot invert the function. And the second property follows from the first. It's called collision resistant, which is to say that finding two different messages, message one and message two, such that the hashes are the same, is computationally impossible. Right? So when we say computationally difficult in computer science, we mean that an adversary with bounded resources cannot do this. An adversary who has only access to reasonable amount of computing will not be able to break a hash function, right? So, or violate any one of the two properties. So it is impossible to construct a false message with the same hash, and it is impossible to find the message given the hash. Right? So these are the two main properties. So how does a public bulletin board work? A public bulletin board, base construction works in the following way: that a bulletin board has these components. IMA is a message. Every bulletin I has a message, has a timestamp, has a writer's identification. This is the identity of the writer. Has a hash and has two signatures, right? So, and it must satisfy the following invariant property: that the hash at every stage must be computed by applying the hash function on the concatenation of the message, the timestamp, the writer identity, and the previous hash, right? So this is something that is in computer science called a hash chain, right? So this is a hash chain, and the writer must sign the hash using the writer's secret key, and the bulletin board must sign the writer's signature and the bulletin board's timestamp. The bulletin board's timestamp should be within a small delay of the writer's timestamp. So that is the requirement of a bulletin board. So given this hash chain by the property of the hash function, this bulletin board is tamper-proof. Right? So nobody can, once a message has gone onto the bulletin board, if the hash function is strong enough and if the hash function is not broken, it is almost it is impossible to alter a message. Right? So this makes an append-only bulletin board. How is it different from a blockchain? It is different from a blockchain. Blockchain has got two constraints. One is the hash chain. Every block is hashed and in exactly this manner. But there is also blockchain has multiple parties, party 1, party 2, party 3, depending on whether the blockchain is private or public. If the blockchain is public, then anybody can join as an authority in a blockchain. If the blockchain is permissioned or a private blockchain, then only a few people who are allowed can join. And these guys must agree using a very complicated consensus algorithm that what items should go onto the blockchain. Right? So what gets added onto the blockchain is decided by a distributed consensus algorithm. That's the only way the blockchain is different from a public bulletin board that I described out here. Now, in this case, there is only one authority, right? It's an election authority. And so there is no question of a multiple consensus deciding what should be on. So that does not give us any security, right? So if the 3 election commissioners try to decide, they can collude and they can fool voters, right? So that's an insecure protocol. What is required out here and what is often not understood, what should get onto the blockchain is determined by a receipt. So anytime there is an application, there has to be a searchable reference to an issued receipt. So once you have issued a receipt, once the election commission has issued receipt to a voter for any kind of an application, for enrollment or change application, then the election commissioner is obligated to put up an entry. If a voter can produce a receipt for which no processing information is there on the bulletin board, then that is malfeasance on the part of the election authority. So what gets added onto the bulletin board is determined by what receipts are issued by the application or what commitment. So anytime you issue a receipt, you give a commitment that I'll process this application. I'll either accept it or reject it or do whatever, and there has to be a corresponding entry. So if you can produce a receipt with a certain date and corresponding to which there is no processing information in the bulletin board, then that indicates malfeasance. So you don't really require complicated consensus algorithms. Right? So this is a simple tool which can be used, and you never need a blockchain for this. And But amazingly, for this problem, the internet is full of complicated blockchain-based solutions. So, privacy. A voters list is an incredible privacy problem. There is a privacy versus public verifiability issue comes out in the most prominent way in a voter system, in an electoral role. So in an electoral role in a country like India, where the names are disclosed caste and religion, this is a nightmarish issue. So Election Commission of India's response to this is to keep the electoral roll as an unsearchable image, as a bitmap, right? Now, that does not give any privacy, right? Just to make that it is not, it's not searchable by ordinary means. There's an assumption which is of privacy, which I think is incorrect. Right? If you want privacy, I'm not saying that privacy is desirable out there, right? That's not for me to decide. That's not for a designer to decide. That's for the society and the parliament to decide. But if you want privacy, here is a way. You can replace each message in a bulletin board with a hash, right?
Subhashis,
yes.
Just a quick question from the chat about whether the number of collisions is also required to be bounded.
Of course, yes. The number of collisions in a hash has to be bounded. So I'm not getting into the properties of a hash function, but there are many hash functions that do it. That are collision resistant. Actually, hash functions have got a problem that they get broken, and newer hash functions come and they get broken. So it's a cycle. So it's a game between the cryptographer and the attacker. It's a continuous game. But there are secure hash functions that are reasonably collision resistant, and one can show that. Collisions can happen only with a negligible probability. That's sort of easy to show in cryptography. And for privacy, so access to the unalterable messages. So the hashing, just probably replacing the message with hashes gives you the untamperability. And access to the unalterable messages can only be given to authorized entities, representative of political parties after authentication. Special auditors. Now, whether only special auditors should audit or whether it should be publicly audited, that is a question that needs to be asked in the parliament and decided. So then there was this question about remote offline voting. Migrants, 200 million migrants in India who do not vote. To my mind, the solution is again, take applications from them, whether they want to vote from their home in Begusarai or they want to vote from Delhi. And they want to vote for which constituency, maintain status of all applications on public bulletin boards, then reconcile across constituencies and publish final electoral rolls, and then finally hold offline multi-race polling stations at remote locations. For example, in Delhi, at a polling booth, you should hold multi-race polling, which means that all 542 constituencies in the country, it should be possible to vote from Delhi. And this is not internet voting. You should be able to go select which constituency you are voting for, cast your ballot. That's called multi-race polling station voting. And post-election, the results can be, uploaded and for counting. So I'll discuss that bit later. But this is what may appear to be a simple solution to maintenance of electoral rolls, at least the part of it that can be technically addressed. And this does not require complicated consensus protocol and blockchains. Right? Yeah. So I will move on to voting. I'll stop here on electoral rolls, but if there are questions, then we can maybe have a short discussion.
Yeah, you want to do some questions on the electoral rolls?
Yeah, maybe we can take a couple of questions before I get on to voting.
Yes, okay, that's actually a good idea. And I just wanted to add, because of Nildara's question about the bounding conditions of the collisions, that it's a useful thing to know about hashing functions that are, so what we'd call a cryptographic hash function. So a hash function that is useful for cryptographic purposes, that it'll have a uniform distribution on the image and that the image will be equal to the codomain. And that statistical property basically guarantees a certain bounding of the collision rate.
Yes. So that, so you typically have to show that the collision probabilities are negligible, right? It is less than a pre-specified epsilon. And,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a question from Anand.
Yeah.
Hi. So I have a question about how do you really make this tamper-proof? So let's say if it's a BI bulletin has been published, what stops from the officials to publish a BI dash the next day by making some changes to it?
The assumption is that the authorities will not be able to fudge the hash functions. They won't be able to compute the hash function.
They're not. But let's take B9 and then they did a B10 now. Okay.
Yes.
Now
so
they can create
B10 will have the hash of B9.
True. Got it. Okay. Now what stops them from actually releasing another version of B10 using the same old hash the next day?
They can, it is up to them. So whatever they put up, the onus is on them to be answerable for that. The question is that whatever they have put up, they cannot go back and alter it. And if whatever they have put up don't explain what has happened to my application, right? It is publicly viewable. Anybody can figure out that they have not processed my application correctly. Yeah. So as long as they give a commitment and a receipt, it is obligatory on their part to process it correctly. They cannot hide anymore. Yeah.
But my point is, like, even forking the chain that you have is still possible, because I can rewrite. I can
so you can fork a chain, but
whether
you want to do that or not, ultimately through these bulletins, you are explaining that you have processed my information correctly. So whatever you do, fork or do whatever you want, ultimately the ECI has to give an explanation to everybody, which anybody in the public can check. So if they have done something wrong, it is evident on the bulletin.
No, so my point is, like, using the hash function here is not adding any value, because the authorities can fork and actually create a new chain at any point. So there's no value actually using the.
In whichever chain you take, all the precedent hashes are included. So HI contains HI-1. So the hash invariance property has to be satisfied by every chain.
Yeah.
And if you fork a chain, even the new chain is not alterable. You can fork as many chains as you want, but you cannot alter anything.
No, I get the point. So, I mean, unless someone is kind of having an archive of the chain that's been published,
yes,
like a gadget that's kind of published and that's unalterable, okay, something like that, the property is there. Without having something like that, having a chain, I don't see.
Yeah. So the assumption is anything that you have published, somebody has downloaded.
But whoever's downloaded,
or you upload. The Election Commission uploads to NIC. Anything that they have downloaded, maybe Congress and BJP, they both downloaded. Yeah. So you need something like that.
Yeah. So you need to have a third-party verifiable agency where this goes there, and so unless you're having that third the agency that verifies and says that this has been altered, I mean, we don't. I mean, this alone doesn't seem to be.
Yeah. So every message is signed, so they cannot go back on their words. So somebody else should have a copy of the bulletin board. Yeah. Somebody else has to download the bulletin board periodically. So that's a minor point, so that can be easily taken care of.
It might also be useful to think of this in terms of if you are one of the reasons for maintaining the hash is so that you can cheaply verify that nothing has changed, right? Because if you had to maintain the entire database and then compare all of it every time, then that becomes expensive for large databases.
Yes. And the hash chain gives you easy methods to verify it. Yeah. So, so this public bulletin board is constructed computer science, which is very, very old. It's 40, 50-year-old and has been used. It's extensively used construct. And many times when people talk blockchain, what they really require is a public bulletin board. And they really don't want a blockchain. A blockchain is required for a cryptocurrency because so unless you want a consensus on the ordering of the transactions, which you don't need in this case, you don't need a blockchain. All you need is a public bulletin board, which is a very simple construct and can be programmed like that. It's a trivial thing to program. Yeah.
There's one more question here from Abhishek for maintaining and uploading of electoral rolls. On whom does the onus fall? Also, what happens to citizens, voters who are not early tech adopters? Are there any predictions as to when such a system can be put in place?
So, this public bulletin board has to be maintained by an authority. And you have to have a protocol that they upload to some 3 other sites that they don't control. Anytime they publish, they have to upload to 3 other sites that they don't control. So that requires so verification, Pandits can verify for you. So of course, if you are unable to compute a hash, you can take it to Hasgeek and Hasgeek can verify for you. So, you can bring it to IIT Delhi and, some students can verify. So the thing is, the public bulletin board is out there, downloadable by everybody in the world, and anybody can verify. So you can go to your friend and ask the friend to verify. Yeah. So, if public bulletin board is putting it like publishing in Indian Express, so you can't go back on what you have published. That's the analogy. That as long as you put your processing information and publish it every day in Indian Express, enough number of people have copies of it, and it is impossible for you to go back and change a record. So simply put, that's the analogy.
So 2 more questions, and then I think we should move on and maybe take more questions on the whole afterwards. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
So Aryan asks, it says it brings us to an interesting question about who owns the infrastructure of the blockchain. Do we trust the existing government or any private entity doing so? And I think that just generally comes down to the trust in do we generally trust these information sources, and can we just assume that somebody is checking all of the bulletins?
So, the notion of a public bulletin board is precisely because you don't have to trust anybody. See, you have to make a law so that it is the election authority's responsibility to publish the public bulletin board. They can publish it in whatever hardware, whatever software they want. You don't care as long as these hashes are correct and the messages are down there on the list. Now, the correctness of this, it just depends on independent parties having copies of this, right? So what are the standard independent parties who will be interested in this? The political parties who are contesting the election. They have a natural interest in downloading this and keeping an interest with it, right? And if 2 political parties, political party 1 and political party 2, they have downloaded and they have a contest about which is the correct bulletin board, anybody can verify from the hashes and the signs. So that is unalterable and that's cryptographically secure. So the purpose of a bulletin board is to remove the trust requirement from everybody. Right? So so from a trust requirement, you go to an obligation requirement. It's the obligation of the Election Commission of India to demonstrate that every application has been processed correctly. Yeah.
So I'll take one more question from YouTube. Can you please explain the protocol from the perspective of that we need to register a voter's entry to count votes while leaving out who the voter voted for? So essentially, right to confidential vote. I think this is probably what you're getting to. So it might be a bit too detailed.
So for the electoral roll, all you have to do is to go to an electoral office, file an application, and get a receipt for it that I have filed an application, and you have accepted my application, right? And that's it. And with that application, you can search in the bulletin board for satisfaction. Right? So whether your application has been processed correctly. So that's all that a voter has to.
And
Okay. Yeah.
so a lot of this just harkens back to so what we were talking about last time about having a single national registry, and how this bulletin board approach is essentially equivalent to doing just that in practice. But
yes. So what I am saying is a bulletin board per constituency, and I have carefully avoided the national identity linkage, right? Deliberately so. Now that's an open question. How to link it with a national identity and how to do the deduplication publicly on a bulletin board is a question. I have a lot of thoughts on it, but maybe for some other day.
Yeah, well, I guess we should move on to your next part, and we'll get to more questions at the end.
Sure. Thanks. And that is about verifiable voting, right? So again, I'll start with the declaration that I am not really recommended that you move to verifiable voting, right? Not at all. In fact, I have great hesitation in making that recommendation. I am making this presentation just to illustrate verifiable voting. Yeah. So just to recap, what did we discuss last time? That there is almost all jurisdictions require a voter verified paper ballot, and the only thing that is considered safe in an election right now, according to law of most countries, including India, is this quadrant: pressing voting in person with voter verifiable paper ballots. So India, so almost all of Europe, except Switzerland and countries like Estonia, all of United States, they just operate in the first pressing. And US also does mail-in ballot, which is remote. So you use postal ballots to do it. So does India. And this is considered slightly unsafe because when you are doing a ballot, when you are filling in the ballot and putting it in an envelope in your home, you can be coerced by your family members, or God knows who else is there at your home who can coerce you. So this is considered more risky. Internet and blockchain voting, there is no way to resolve the coercion problem when you are doing an internet-based voting. So we discussed it in the last class, and there's been enormous amount of material written by Ron Rivest and others to show that why this is not even a possibility, and why blockchain voting is a strict no-no. And I will not get into that today. And but I have posted a paper by the MIT folks on that. DRE voting we discussed last time. This is direct record electronic in an EVM. It's also considered unsafe because there is no obvious way to prove who you voted for, whether the machine has recorded your intention correctly. Right? That's an impossibility to prove. What India uses is somewhere in between the pressing voting and a DRE voting. Right? It uses a DRE in a pressing and gives a VVPR. Right? So it's an EVM plus VVPAT solution, which takes the DRE into the pressing voting thing, and at least it gives a VVPAT. So which is more acceptable. And as we have discussed in the last time, it will be acceptable if the VVPAT is truly voter verifiable. Right? So what did we discuss in the last time? For those who have missed it, we discussed that evidence-based election is auditability plus audit. So you first must have auditability. If you don't have auditability, then the election protocol is invalid. But just auditability does not give you evidence. You have to actually conduct an audit. So if I have to again write down the desiderata, the first desiderata is of course ballot secrecy. Then we discussed this at length in the last class. So we said that we request software independence, which is to say that this is not to say that you don't use software, but this is to say that if there is a change in the software, either willful change or an inadvertent change in the software or in the hardware, then that should be auditable. So that should not cause an undetectable change in the election outcome. So if the software has got changed, then that should always be detectable. And then we say that that should always be possible to catch it in an audit. So that's something that we call software independence. Almost all countries require you to have voter verifiable paper records, and these are the ballots. So because these are the ballots, they cannot fall, as we discussed, into a sack behind a glass window, like it happens in India, right? That's not voter verifiable. A voter verifiable is that, I can use my agency to cancel if I think that that the EVM has not recorded my vote, right? And ultimately, the correct solution almost always is if I get the VVPR in my hand and put it in a box, right? That means I completely and totally agree with what has been printed on the VVPR. So the Indian voting solution is not that, and this requires a change. Then, of course, you require contestability. So if you say that the EVM has not recorded my vote correctly, or if the VVPR has printed my vote wrong, right now the Indian system is not contestable. I mean, you can shout, but you will never be able to prove that you are not lying, right? And they'll impose a 5,000 rupee fine on you. That is not correct. So, of course, you require contestability. And finally, you require an audit. So if you look at the Indian system and all systems all over, they assume that the sack containing the voter verifiable paper record is untamperable. That's an assumption. The custody chain of it is made trustworthy by traditional methods like putting seals. Each candidate and each political party puts a seal on it, and they follow it, and they ensure that it gets into the strong room correctly, and the seal is never opened. And so, if you assume that the voter verified paper record is untamperable, those sacks are untamperable, then you can use this VVPAT slips or VVPR slips to do an audit of the electronic account, right? So in India, we said that the audit procedure is not correct. That's what we discussed in the last class, that you don't do adequate statistical audit. But if you have the VVPR and if you assume that the VVPR is trustworthy, then potentially you can do an audit by depending on do a statistical or a full manual audit by following a protocol, right? Sensible protocol. And that is the desired data for all elections. So most of the current elections, they trust on VVPR and an audit of the VVPR. So that's what gives them software independence, sort of half and half software independence. Because what is the weak point out there? The weak point out there is that ensuring that the VVPRs have not been tampered, right? That some voter verified paper audit trails have not been thrown away and new ones have not got added, in the transit. So what we will question today is, can end-to-end public verifiability using cryptography help, right? So it turns out, or it's well known in computer science, that you can use cryptographic technique to give guarantees for all of this, right? Almost perfect guarantees for all of this. And yet computer scientists and others don't recommend that they be used, and they are almost never used in an election. But many people think that it's just a matter of time, that that the people at large will get more familiar with cryptography, and cryptography will become more acceptable, and they'll get used in to solve all of these problems, including the trustworthiness of the VVPR trend. Whether that will happen, or when that will happen, or whether it is desirable to happen, is not for me to answer. Right? I have always believed that it's the job of the computer scientist to operationalize and never to decide what should happen. Right? But lay out the pros and cons, that if this happens, then what are the risks, right? Correct. So that's what I'll do. I'll describe a prototypical cryptographic system that can take care of all of this, and and then throw the question open to all of you, whether they should be used or not. So let me start by reviewing some popular E2E verifiable system, right? And because Mari asked the question of homomorphic computing, I'll start with the homomorphic computing system. And this is a very, very popular system called scratch and vote, very elegant. So this uses what is called a PRETA voter style ballots. And this kind of ballots were made popular by PRETA voters. So which is an old voting system. And what do you have? You have the candidate's name in the left-hand side of the ballot in a random order. You have the marking space in the right-hand side of the ballot. And typically the voter puts a tick on the ballot, marks it, tears it off from the middle, discards the left half. The left half is shredded in the polling booth, so nobody knows this. You go into the polling booth, put your tick mark, and discard the left half. This ballot, of course, has to be a covered ballot. Then you go out of the polling booth and give the right half to an election officer who puts it in a scanner. So the right half is scanned. And note that the right half, the polling officer or nobody can determine who you voted for, because all they know that is that you voted in the third position or the second position. Since the left half is gone, this is perfectly safe. And in homomorphic backend, what you have is that you have an encryption of this randomness. So this has got, in this case, there are 4 candidates. So this has got 4 sections. This QR code will have 4 sections. The first section will encode the vector 1000. The second will encode the vector 0100. The third will encode the vector 0010, and the fourth will encode the vector 0001. Right. So that's, and the encryption parameters are here, under this scratch cover, which should normally be opened only for audit. So these are ballots that are kept outside a polling booth, and before election starts, auditors, which should include candidates, representatives, and members of the public, they can pick up a statistically significant sample from the ballot box, open up this, and ensure for themselves that the encryption is correct. So you have to typically, if you have got n ballots, sampling order login ballots for correctness ensures that all ballots are correct with a very high probability. Right. So once election commences, the assumption is that all ballots are correct. So that's a scratch and vote. I'll tell you that how the counting happens later. Then there are mixed-net-based backends. Mixed-net-based backends are very similar in principle, but instead of the encryption, you have a code out here which is called an onion. Right. Now, with this onion, this is committed at the back end. So this ballot cannot be audited on the spot. But what can be done is that a login sample of ballots can be collected from the polling booth. Assuming that they are correct, the polling can go on. And these ballots can be audited later. Right? You can, after election, you can audit that these, so these ballots are all committed before. So you can audit that every ballot that was picked up was correct. So which would in turn imply that every ballot that was used was also correct. And typically in these kinds of ballots, the left card is discarded after polling. The randomness, and the right part is scanned at the EVM as a take-home receipt. So you take the right part as a receipt back home. Oops, sorry. I have to aim correctly. Okay, so in scratch and vote in the homomorphic encryption, what is the protocol? This is by Adida and Rivest. Adida has a voting company now, which is very famous. I have to ask him whether he's making money, but he makes electronic voting protocols, and that's a startup. So these receipts that you have taken home are displayed on a public bulletin board, exactly of the type that I described. So every receipt, the election commission puts up on a public bulletin board. These are the voter IDs. Alice, Bridget, Carol, and so on and so forth. They are the voter IDs. So anybody who has voted can take the receipt, use the QR code to look up the receipt on the bulletin board and ensure that the receipt is there on the bulletin board, that your vote is counted, your vote is recorded correctly, and your vote is being counted. Right? And then the Election Commission does a public homomorphic counting on the bulletin board. So multiplying these encryptions. So in this case, you pick up the second encryption. In this case, you pick up the third encryption. In this case, you pick up the second encryption. In this case, you pick up the last encryption. Multiply all of them, and the homomorphic. So you multiply the encryption, and that turns out to be an encryption of the summation. Right. So that's the homomorphic property. So you do the computation in the encryption domain. So anybody in the public, who knows how to write a program, can download the bulletin board and do this computation. And this computation is exactly equivalent to this computation. So finally, the election authority provides a zero knowledge proof that without revealing the encryption, the election authority gives a proof that the decryption has been done correctly. Right? The final decryption of this tally has been done correctly. Right? So this is a system that I believe was used in Maryland as a pilot and discarded, not because it did not work, but because the public did not quite understand what was going on. This sounded a little bit like magic to them, and magic cannot be allowed in an election. So this has not been tried since. And this is not compatible with the VVPR. This is not compatible with the VVPR for the reason that, look, the EVM, which is scanning the right part, doesn't get to know the vote. So it doesn't know what the vote is, right? That's an encrypted vote. So an EVM, because it doesn't know the vote, it cannot leak the vote. But the flip side is that it cannot even print the vote on a VVPR. Right? So this is not at all compatible with the VVPR. What is the advantage? The advantage is that you do not require special EVMs. You can use an app on a cell phone as the EVM. Right? So that's also fine. So almost anything will work as an EVM. Simple scanners, cell phones. The electoral officer's cell phone is a good enough EVM. So all he needs to do is just to scan and upload to the public bulletin board. And he cannot not upload something because the receipt against ensures that a voter who turns out with a correct receipt, signed receipt, and doesn't find the receipt in the bulletin board has a proof that something has gone wrong, the election has gone wrong. So it's the authority's responsibility to answer for every receipt that has been issued. So that gives you the accountability. And this is a system that probably cannot be hacked very easily.
Just to inject here, because you have that formula for public homomorphic counting, it does seem that scheme would be very sensitive to. So in the event of somebody injecting a message of some kind that was purposefully poisoned somehow.
Yes. Yeah. So I am not getting into the detail. They have got a poison checking method.
But you essentially have one spoiled vote invalidate the entire election, and that's a sensitivity that you'd normally not want in a system.
Yeah. So they have a cover for it. They use a signing mechanism on top of this, which checks the grammar, that every encryption is of a correct grammar, and you cannot inject a spurious one. So the validity of each receipt is verified using another zero knowledge. So I'm not getting into that detail. I'm just explaining in a rough concept. So for those details, you can read the original paper of Adida and Rivest. This is considered a very safe scheme, but of course, there are usability issues, and hence nobody talks about it. Right? This is sort of has been relegated to an academic paper. But this gives an idea very strongly, and this is an election that cannot be tampered, cannot be fudged, publicly verifiable, and all of that. Um, there is a small attack possible. I'll discuss that attack later. Okay. The other popular voting schemes are, this is one, scantinity, and instead of homomorphic encryption, many of this voting protocol use a concept called mixnet. That's another cryptographic protocol. The ones with the onions, they use a mixnet. So what is an onion? The onion is, so a mixnet is a sequence of shufflers, right? Shufflers and encryptors. Uh, so these shufflers and encryptors, so this is like, what is a mixnet? So if you used a VPN or a proxy like Tor, that's a mixnet, right? So that hides the destination from the source. That gives you an anonymity between the destination and the source. So these shuffles and the encryption corresponding to the shuffles are publicly committed before the election. So each shuffle can be by a different organization. There can be different trustees, that are responsible for these shuffles. So the first shuffle can be by trustee one, the second shuffle can be by trustee two, and so it's called an onion because the first shuffler puts his own encryption, and the second shuffler encrypts the first encryption, and so on and so forth. So finally, when you decrypt, you have to peel off the onion, keep decrypting using the public key of each trustee, and finally you get the decryption, right? And post voting, so you keep the mapping between candidates and the serial number, the candidate order in the shufflers, and depending on the process that you get, you pass the cross to the shuffler, and at the end of this, you get a public bulletin board. So you have got a public bulletin board at the beginning of the shuffler, where every voter can verify that her receipt is there. And then there is a public final bulletin board where all the serial numbers are removed, and you have got all the votes in clear text, and anybody with a computer can download this public bulletin board and add the votes and get the output, right? So that there's been no cheating at any of the shuffler can be proved using zero knowledge proofs, using mixed encryption. So there is a paper by Lundin and Ryan in 2008 that showed that one of the mixnet schemes was made compatible with the VVPR. And this VVPR required, so the votes had to be encrypted on the VVPR slips, and each VVPR slip at the counting station requires a decryption, which makes it a little unusable, right? So you have to take every VVPR slip and use an independent key to decrypt before you can do a VVPR audit at the counting station. Now that will make counting go on forever. The auditing will go on forever. And again, this paper was relegated to be one only of academic interest. I'm not sure that this mixnet-based protocol, at least this one, has ever been tried. Mixnets without VVPRs have been tried in large elections in the United States and at the pilot level, but they have not become popular. So those pilots were considered to be failures. So though you can give mathematical proofs that this is tamper-free, convincing the public that it is the case is hard, and the public doesn't even understand what is going on. So that's not considered to be a valid or a proper election. Right, and both of these are something that has been not used in India because India decided to move away from hand-marked ballots. And I am told that India's reason for moving away from hand-marked ballots is that a significant percentage of our population is unlettered. And that results, and these are people who have never held a pen or never held, are not used to stamping. And they apparently did not put the tick in the right location. So they put the tick in between the two candidates, or put the stamp in between the two candidates, and that resulted in a huge number of ballots getting wasted. Right? So invalid ballot problem was incredibly high, especially in the rural constituencies in India. And this is the reason why the Election Commission of India in the early 2000s decided not to use this paper ballots. They discarded this. So US does not use a DRE, direct record electronic system at all. It's almost always a paper ballot and scanning system, right? So they are culturally more tuned to it, and that's the way it works. And most places that use a ballot is hand-marked paper ballot, but India uses a DRE system, which is direct record electronic, and making those verifiable, as I mentioned a little bit in the last class, is much, much harder because the recorded as intended guarantees, the proofs that one has to give, they turn out to be particularly complicated. So there is one system by Adida and Neff and called Mark Pledge. There the voter needs to get into a challenge response with the machine, and the voter has to repeatedly match 5-digit strings several times. So it's an interactive proof between the voter and the it's an interactive cryptographic proof between the voter and the EVM. And you can guess that's not popular. So that's just a paper. Star Vote, on the other hand, it's a 19-author paper by Rivest, and all those people are on this paper. This is a completely provable DRE protocol, which I will not describe. I'll describe something we have cooked up. Similar to this. This is being deployed and tested in large elections in Germany and in pre-banning, actually post-banning. This was tested with the Supreme Court's permission, I think, in Saarbrück, and post-banning in Germany. And this was also tested in some US elections, right? This supports VBPR, but this requires, so the way that you give a proof to your voter that your vote has been recorded correctly is that you encrypt the vote. This is homomorphic encryption. So you encrypt the voter's vote, and then the voter can challenge that, show me that you have encrypted my vote correctly. So this is called a cast false vote and challenge. So if at least 50% of the voters do a false cast and challenge, then you can show that with an overwhelming probability, this is correct for all voters. But, casting false votes and challenging is a protocol, whether it is practical, whether voters would be able to follow this protocol or will understand the need for it, is a big question. So for obvious reasons, cast or challenge protocols are not very popular. It's a cryptographic construct that is considered to be slightly meaningless. And star vote is a great protocol, but it could not quite figure out how to get rid of this step. So this step comes out again because it's a DRE machine. You press a button for Congress, and the machine, how does it prove that it is a recorded Congress inside? That's a problem, right? So that's a problem that requires solving, and that problem is not easy to solve. So if this is with this background, I'll move on and try to build a solution that addresses all of this, right? So, and as we move along, we'll see that it is not easy. It will make the system somewhat complicated, right? And whether it's complicated enough or it's easy enough is a subjective decision. But at least technically, all these problems can be addressed. And that's what we will endeavor to show as we move along. So I'll need some crypto basics, right? So I'll try to keep this very, very simple. But since it is crypto-based, I couldn't figure out a way to avoid the basic crypto, right? So I'll need exactly two things. The first one is I'll need the notion of a commitment. So what's a commitment? A commitment is that you commit a value. Like x is equal to 5, right? So you commit the value 5 to x, and the metaphor is that you put it in a box, you commit the value, you put it in a box, you keep the key and give away the box, right? So your commitment is a secret. Nobody can peep inside the box and see that what you have committed. That's not possible. So this guy will have to keep on wondering what the number is forever. And you cannot change the value because you don't have the box. You've written the key, but you've given away the box. So you cannot change the value. So once you have committed, right? There's no going back on it. So that's the metaphor. At a later point of time, you can reveal the commitment and say that at the end of the protocol, show that, look, check for yourself that I've committed 5. Right? So that's the notion of a commitment. Cryptographic commitments were invented around 1980s by Chom. The other concept that I require, again from the mid-80s, are something called zero-knowledge proofs. And in zero-knowledge proof of knowledge, you prove that you give a mathematical proof, typically interactive, that you know something without revealing any information, even a bit of information about what you know. Yet you give a convincing proof that you know the value of x. So you know the value of x without conveying any information other than the fact that you know the value of x, right? So nothing about x. So your adversary can glean no information about x whatsoever. So what are the examples? Examples are that, that you prove that you're of drinking age. This is an example I use for teaching to IIT students, that you prove that you're of drinking age, but you don't reveal your age or don't show you any certificate or whatever, but give a mathematical proof that you are above 18 in an interactive manner, but don't reveal anything about any certificate or age. That would be a zero-knowledge proof. Or you could give a proof that you know 2 prime numbers p and q, so you know the factorization of n, but without telling them what p and q are. So factoring composites has been a challenge in computer science, and we have not been able to find a good algorithm to do this. In fact, there is no known algorithm to factor a number like 15 as 3 into 5. Of course, we can do it for small numbers, but for large numbers, something that has got, say, 1,000 digits, we don't know how to solve this problem. So of course, multiplication is easy, but factoring is hard. So you can say that, I know prime numbers p and q, such that n is equal to p and q, but I won't tell you what p and q are. That would be a zero-knowledge proof. Or C is an encryption of M, but I won't show you the encryption of Q. But I'll tell you that this is a ciphertext of a message M without showing you the key. Or this is a commitment for a message M, but I'll not show you the commitment key, but yet give you a proof that this is a commitment of this message. So these are all zero-knowledge proofs. These are incredibly powerful techniques called interactive proofs that were invented. And almost any statement that can be described in NP, which is by a non-deterministic Turing machine in polynomial time, there is a zero-knowledge proof for it. And zero-knowledge proof exists. So almost any NP statement can be proved in zero-knowledge. And that's a very, very powerful result by these gentlemen. So I won't get into the theory of zero-knowledge proof, but I'll use zero-knowledge proofs in what I describe. And I will require this notion of modular groups. Let me see if I can explain this correctly. Right? So we will be talking about this sets called Zn, which is a finite set of remainders when divided by n. Right? So if I divide a number by n, the remainders cannot be greater than n, and the remainders has to be in 0 to n minus 1. So these are the set of all remainders when divided by n. That's called Zn, right? And Zn supports 2 basic operations, addition and multiplication, in the obvious way. So 11 plus 13 And if I divide that by 16, that is 24. When I divide by that by 16, the remainder is 8. So we say that 11 by plus 13 is equal to 8 in the mod 16 operation. Or 11 into 13 is 15 in the mod 16 operation, right? So this is how we do additions and multiplications and modular groups. And why do we call it a group? So the group is a set like this with operations such as multiplication. And it is closed, which is to say that if I take any two elements from this set and do a multiplication, I get back an element in this set because I always divide by n and get back an element in the set. And if every element has an inverse element, then we say that this is a group. So there is a well-defined algebra. And a group is cyclic if there is a special element, so that every other element can be obtained by raising that by powers of that element. So if that can happen, every element of a group G can be written as G to the power X for some integer X. Then we say that the group is cyclic, and we say that G is a generator for this group. So this is, any cryptographic operation will require a modular group of some sort. So we choose P is a prime. If P is a prime, then we can show that the multiplicative inverse exists, and then this is a multiplicative group. And in cryptography, you almost always choose a group like ZP. And you choose large primes, P and Q. Typically, how large? For contemporary security, you choose P and Q to be, 3072-bit modulus. Actually, for technical reasons, we'll be forced to work on electric curves, which are like modular groups, but I don't, we require 128-bit for electric curve. But let's just stick to modular groups. Forget the electric curves. So we require P and Q to be large, so really, really large numbers. And we use a Q to be a unique cyclic subgroup of P. And we choose two generators, G and H, for the group, right? So we choose a very large group, of 3072 bits. And we choose two generators for it, G and H. And how are these chosen? Typically in cryptography, these are publicly chosen. Publicly chosen, like the randomness to generate the group, you pick up from a hash of the first page of Indian Express, let's say, right? Pick up some public text or New York Times fourth page, first paragraph, right? Hash it and get the randomness. And anybody can generate these group members G and H, right? So it's publicly announced. And what is assumed is that the discrete logarithm of G and H is not unknown to anyone, and nobody will be able to compute this. Actually, you can show that this problem is exactly the same as finding prime factors of a large composite, which nobody knows, as I mentioned, how to do. So nobody knows how to solve a discrete log. So the assumption is nobody will be able to compute the interrelationship of G and H, but both are generators of the group. Right? So that's all the crypto that we require. So let us move on. And once we have this crypto, we need a specific form of a commitment. This is a very popular commitment in cryptography called the Pedersen commitment. And how do you compute it? Suppose you've got a message row from that group. You compute the commitment as G to the power rho and H to the power R. Know that G and H are public generators. R is the key for the commitment. Rho is the message. So you compute the commitment as C. And this Pedersen commitment is perfectly hiding. Why? Because given C, all messages are equally probable. So C leaks no information about the message, none whatsoever. So that's what is called perfectly hiding. And Pedersen commitment is also computationally binding. What does it mean? It means that suppose C is made public by computing as the commitment of rho, to say that to change the message to a rho dash with a new R dash will require you to solve the discrete log problem. right? So to fake a commitment is almost impossible. So we are assuming that nobody has the computational power to be able to fake a commitment. So a commitment is computationally binding. Once given, the message is sealed forever. Nobody can change the message once a commitment is issued. And the commitment does not give any information about the message, right? And the Pedersen commitment is also additively homomorphic, which is to say that if C1 is a commitment for row 1 and C2 is a commitment for row 2, then C1 star C2 is a commitment for row 1 plus row 2. This is something that we will use out there. So, I'll give illustrations of this. So it is not terribly important that you understand it completely, but you have to understand the notion of what a commitment is. Right? A commitment is computed using this way, and a commitment once made cannot be changed. Right? That's the take-home message. That's the very minimum that you need to understand. Okay, so I'll give you 3 concocted protocol. Completely untested, not even implemented. I'm not even sure that we are ever going to implement this. So these are just results of some coffee table discussions in IIT Delhi. But I thought that I'll explain these protocols in a sequence. We call it Desi voting, so that just so that I'm able to illustrate what a voting system will look like. So the first version, I'll use not a DRE, but a Preta voter style hand mount ballot. Right? Yeah, so the ballot will look like this. Again, a random order of the candidates. Since Desi voting, I should have used names like Lallu, Kallu, Billu, perhaps. So I'm sorry about these Anglo-Saxon names, but yeah. So continuing with David, Bob, Alice, and Carol. So those come in random order. You've got a right-hand side for marking, and you've got a left-hand side. And votes are 0 to m-1. So we are assuming that even if it's a multi-race election, the ballots for one election are not confused by ballots of. So if you have multi-race, just have another table and the ballot for the next constituency in the separate table. So that's how you can choose the race, which race you're voting for. But every vote is between 0 to m-1, represents an integer between 0 to m-1. So what is the voting process? So I made a mistake. It's not blinded RID, but this should be CRID, commitment for the RID. So every ballot has a random ID, which we call RID, right? So every ballot has a random RID, which is contained in the left part. And the commitments for the random RID and the commitments for these votes are in this QR code on the right-hand side. And this top half contains not the blinded RID, but the commitment for the RID. Cryptographic commitment for the RID is contained in this QR code. This contains the RID and so on and so forth, and this contains all the commitment. What is the voting protocol? The voter detaches the top right part, this part, and gives it to the polling officer for scanning. So each ballot is indexed by the CRID, not BRID. And I made a mistake out here, so read CRID. And the EVM scans the 2 QR codes and the vote, right, of the marked ballot, and stores it, indexed by CRID, and prints the RID vote on a slip, on the VVPR slip. Right? So it reads who you have voted for, it scans the 2 half, it notes the RID from here, notes the CRID from here, and prints the VVPR slip. It's is visible but not detachable. Then it asks the question that, are you happy? Did you really vote for Bob? Have I scanned it correctly? So you have at this stage an option of saying no or yes. And if you say no, then that has to be communicated to the polling officer and the polling agent sitting outside through an independent channel, which does not go through the EVM. This can simply be shouting, or lighting a bulb, another button to light a bulb out there, saying that whether you agree with what has been printed in VVPR or you disagree. So if you disagree, this VVPR the word cancelled is printed out here and it drops into a box. And if you agree, it just drops into a box, right? The voter takes the right-hand side, the remaining part of the right-hand side as a receipt back home. So this protocol, this is so how will we prove it? I'll come to that later, but this obviously has some secrecy issues. What are the secrecy issues? Which will be considered unacceptable in a voting. First, the EVM gets to know your vote, right? So the EVM knows who you have voted for because it has to print the vote out here. The EVM also knows the random ID and the commitment. It knows both. So you have taken away this as a receipt which has the CRID in the part of the receipt. So the EVM knows that the person with the receipt indexed by CRID has voted for Bob. So if the EVM leaks this information, then voter secrecy is completely lost, right? So this is something that cannot be considered acceptable in a voting protocol. Note in an EVM, this is not true because EVM only knows in the Indian EVM that is used, it only knows your vote, but it cannot relate the vote to any kind of RID, right? And being able to, so why am I relating it to RID? So that I can give a proof later. But being able to give a proof later makes me compromise certain secrecy information right out here, which may not be acceptable, right? But let's move on with this understanding. And then at the end of the polling, I put up all information on a public bulletin board from the EVM. So you have got your RID, the QR code, and you've got the commitment for all the candidates. In this case, since the tick is in this position, you will pick up Bob. And you can match your receipt at the bulletin board, which has got that CRID has voted for C Bob. So CRID is known to everybody. Your receipt you can give to your friend, and the friend can go and verify that is indeed on the bulletin board. And this signature by the PO ensures that the holder of the receipt CRID has indeed completed the voting according to the protocol, did not cancel, accepted the voting, and so on and so forth. So note that this CRID was detached and given to the PO. Once you have completed the polling, the PO signs this part and uploads either through the EVM or later to the bulletin board. Second bulletin board collected from the EVM, where we have all the RIDs and the clear text votes, right? So all the RIDs and the clear text votes are consolidated in a second bulletin board. Note that the elements of the first bulletin board are receipts. So these cannot be linked to the second bulletin board. If these are linked to the second bulletin board, then everybody will know who the person with this receipt had voted for Karen, right? And so on and so forth. So we give a proof in zero knowledge that the two bulletin boards are in one-to-one correspondence. So for every entry in bulletin board 1, there is one and only one entry in the bulletin board 2. So this proof is given in zero knowledge. Can construct a ZKP about the one-to-one correspondence. So any member of the public can verify that for every entry on the first bulletin board, there is an entry on the second bulletin board. And these are all the receipts. And we assume that a statistically significant sample of the voters will verify that the receipts are present on the bulletin board 1. So anybody can publicly compute the tally on the second bulletin board, right? So this protocol ensures correctness. This protocol cannot be hacked unless you can hack a cryptographic commitment or you can hack the zero knowledge proof, which is considered to be next to impossible in cryptography. So this is an unhackable system. But of course, there is a possibility of leakage of information from the EVM. So if the EVM leaks out information, for example, in some ultrasonic band, it keeps shouting that, look, this guy just voted for Congress, this guy voted for BJP, but this CRID voted for this. Since it has all the information, if it leaks it out, then the mapping between the two bulletin boards will become public. And that will be considered unacceptable in an election. So see that this brings out the problem that if you have to give a verifiability proof, you have to keep this RID information with you somehow and these commitments somehow. But moment you keep this information, there is a possibility that you will leak this information, right? And if you leak this information, then the voting becomes public. So this is another reason that you don't use cryptography. That your ability to keep this information secure must always remain a little question, right? Whether you can keep a machine like an EVM secure and that will not ever leak information is almost always an untenable assumption. And hence, there's a certain amount of risk in using a protocol such as this. Okay, but let's move on. So what is the summary? It is end-to-end verifiable. The correctness is mathematically provable. Electronic votes are in one-to-one correspondence with a VVPR step. So verifiability is not in question. This is strongly software independent. If at any stage any commitment is wrong, the proof won't, the ZKP will not work. So, or a receipt will not be found on a bulletin board. So this is strongly software independent, because if you find that this receipt does not match, then you know which polling booth it has come from, because the polling officer's signature is there, and you have no other option but to do a repoll in that polling booth. But you don't have to do a repoll everywhere, right? So you know exactly which entry does not match. So you can recover from an error by doing a repoll in a localized domain. So it's strongly software independent. It is susceptible to incorrect ballot marking. So if people don't mark their ballot correctly, that becomes an invalid vote. EVM gets to know all of these, RID, CRID, and the vote, and hence can leak information. So that's a real danger. Now, the PRETA voter is also vulnerable to a coercion attack, a randomization attack. For example, I could, the neighborhood gunda can tell you that, look, I want you to vote in the second position. Right? Your receipt better has a tick mark here. Now, what does it mean? It means that if the coercer or the neighborhood gunda knows that you are unlikely to vote for his party, then he can ensure that your vote is randomized, right? That he votes for your party with the probability 1/4, for his choice with the probability 1/4, and for somebody else with the probability 1/2. Right? So you can, if you know that there's a person comes from a community which is not likely to vote for you, then you can force them to vote for a random candidate. And that would be considered an attack, which is not acceptable, right? That's a problem with actually all PRETA voter kind of a system. So that's a big problem, right? So the verifiability is okay. There is a coercion attack that is possible, and there is a clear secrecy problem out here, right? Okay, let us look at a DRE version of this protocol. So that is Desi voting 2. I'll try to address some of this problem with a DRE system. Now, DRE system, I won't solve this problem, but I'll introduce more problems. What is a DRE problem? The DRE problem is that you are now pressing a button instead of putting a tick. Now, that immediately brings in a new problem of contestability, dispute resolution. So I have to give a proof that if you have pressed 2, I have recorded 2 and I have not recorded 3. So that makes the problem a little more difficult. Now the Indian EVM does not give the proof, and hence it is not verifiable. So any verifiable system will have to give a proof that I have recorded your vote correctly. So the ballot is changed a little bit. So it's not a ballot because now you're pressing a button. So it's a pre-ballot. So it's still a paper. This part has still the CRID, exactly the same for the polling officer. This part has the commitment for the RID, which is CRID, and has a commitment CU for an obfuscation token U. Right. So I'll tell you what the obfuscation token is for. So you take the RID and U as random from ZQ, put it in the left QR code. These are the ballot secrets, RID and U. In the right QR code, you put the commitments for them, CRID and CU. And these numbers are a one-time pad, so that, corresponding to Alice, I have got V, and these are W, such that they are U plus V mod Q mod M. Right? So these are numbers, cyclic numbers, such that they obfuscate your vote. Right? So corresponding to, so you use VU to hide the vote V. And note that this is perfectly hiding. Addition is a perfectly hiding operation in a modular arithmetic. So, the number 3 corresponding to that, the number 3 corresponds to Bob, cannot be found out unless I give you the one pad time E. Right? So it's completely hidden out there. Right? So that's a value. So what is the protocol now? The protocol is so that you take your ballot, pick up a ballot randomly, and by assumption, all ballots are correct because they're all auditable. So you assume that the ballots are audited. Every ballot that you have picked up is a correct ballot. You go to the polling machine, and the first thing you do is that you cast your vote, right? And moment you cast your vote, the EVM prints out a commitment for the vote. Using the public parameters G and H, it prints out a commitment for the vote. This is the partial receipt. It's printed, but you cannot still detach it. So the first thing before EVM can seize your ballot, it gives you a commitment that this is the vote that I've recorded. Then it says that, okay, put your ballot in the scanner, please get it scanned. So you get your ballot scanned, and EVM then computes and prints W out here, right? So if you have cast for Bob and W against Bob is 3, the EVM independently computes from the U plus V that it is 3, and ask you, and also print out on the VVPR slip the RID and Bob, and says that, do you agree that this is correct? The number 3 is correct, and what I have printed on the VVPR is correct. So at this stage, you can cancel, in which case both these will be marked cancelled and discarded, and you'll be asked to vote again with a new ballot. Or you can say okay, and if you say okay, then this VVPR will drop into the VVPR sack, and you are given a proof, you are given a printout in a QR code that the CU is on your ballot already. So you are given a printout of the keys for RU plus IRV, and you are given a proof that CU star CV is a commitment for U plus V. Now, since so you are given a mathematical proof for this. So this is a proof is in the part of your receipt. You can take it back home and give it to anybody, give it to Hasgeek if you trust them, and say verify that the proof is correct. So what Hasgeek can do from your receipt is that the receipt has CU. The receipt that you take from the pre-ballot has CU. This has got CV. So Hasgeek can do this multiplication. G and H are publicly verified. So it can verify that this indeed is a commitment for W, which is U plus V, with the key RU plus RV, right? And note that it does not reveal you, it does not reveal V, but it reveals the addition, which is perfectly hiding. And this constitutes a proof that the commitment CV is correct, because CU is correct by assumption by the audit of the ballot. That CU is a correct commitment. CU star CV is a correct commitment plus U plus V that Hasgeek can verify for you. And this in turn would imply that the commitment for V that the EVM has given you is also correct, right? So this is a proof, a zero knowledge proof that your vote has been recorded correctly within the EVM. And the election commission cannot ever go back on the vote, right? So if you don't accept it, then you have got a denial of service attack. So if you keep pressing error, get a new ballot paper and do this 1,000 times, then somebody will have to evict you out of the polling booth forcibly. So it's a partial dispute resolution, right? So they have to keep on giving you a second chance. And if you keep saying that every time the EVM is doing wrong, then you have to be timed out at some point in time. But if you ever accept it, then you cannot raise a dispute anymore. Then the EVM has given you a proof that it has recorded your vote correctly. Right? Rest of the protocol remains. So this is a way a DRE protocol can give you a proof that your vote has been recorded correctly. The rest of the protocol remains exactly the same. The two bulletin boards, bulletin board 1 and bulletin board 2. The risks are also the same. Right? So the EVM gets to know all your votes, all your secrets. The EVM leaks information, then you're gone. If the ballot leaks information, then also you're gone. Right? So that compromises secrecy in a trivial way. But we have so far taken care of the verifiability problem, and we have taken care of the problem that we can give a proof that we have recorded your vote correctly. So the only remaining problem is secrecy. That is something that I'll address in the third protocol. Give me another 5 minutes and I'll take care of the third version of Desi voting, which will be secrecy preserving. And so what is the protocol? I'll just describe it in one page. Covered ballot with 5 sections. Now I'm not drawing anything. The first section has the CRID for the polling officer's signature. The second section has RID and U, but this time not in clear text. This time it is encrypted, right? This is encrypted using a key, which is at the back end with the election authority, and it uses any encryption key, any strong encryption scheme to encrypt the pair RID and U being exactly what it is. The third section has the mapping of candidate to the W and to a random symbol. The seed of the random number is generated from encryption of RID and U. That itself can be a seed. So the random symbol, think of the random symbol as something easy for the voter to match. You know, it can be, think of it as, it can even be an emoticon, right? The smileys. That's a so you've got the smiley library, pick up against each candidate, have a W and have an emoticon, right? A random emoticon seeded by encryption of this. And the receipt contains the CRID, the CU, the CV, the CV to W mapping, RU plus RV, right? And note that from this receipt, this part of the receipt, no information can be figured out simply because of the perfect hiding property of the commitment. Right? So what is the protocol? The EVM scans the encrypted RID and U, and the EVM scans this. Right? Note that this time the EVM does not get to know your RID. It gets to know CRID, but even if it leaks CRID, no harm, because CRID is a part of the receipt and hence public anyway. Right? So RID and U are the secrets, and that the EVM doesn't get to know. It gets to know only the encryption for them. So EVM does not get to know what is the random RID corresponding to this free ballot. So the voter does not select a vote. The voter selects the number W, which is against that candidate, right? Which is U plus V, right? So voter selects W, the EVM prints theta, right? How does the EVM print theta? Because the EVM has taken the random seed from the encryption already. So it knows what symbol has gone against W. So it prints the corresponding emoticon, theta. The voter matches the emoticon that EVM has printed against the one against of the pre-ballot. And if the voter has at this stage has the option of not agreeing or agreeing, not agreeing will require you to recast. And if you agree, the EVM already has a proof. This constitutes the RU plus RV gives you a proof that CU star CV has been committed using RU plus RV. So that proof is already the voter has with him. So the EVM just signs W on receipt 2 and gives out receipt 2. And EVM prints an encrypted version of RID U and W on the VVPR, right? Now this protocol, the EVM does not get to know the vote. So the EVM does not get to know any ballot secrets. So the EVM is just just a collator. So the EVM can be a cell phone, and anybody can write an app on a cell phone and give it to the polling officer. So the polling officer's cell phone can work as an EVM. The camera can work as a scanner, a simple QR code scanner, and no information can ever leak from the EVM. Think of it from the voter's perspective. There is a lot of backend cryptography going on, but what does the voter have to do? The voter has to just take the ballot, enter the polling booth, select the number W against the candidate, look up the number W against the candidate, press that button on the EVM, right? The EVM will print an emoticon which the voter has to match against the ballot, agree or disagree. That is all the obligation on the voter, right? And the voter walks out with a proof which the voter himself cannot verify, but voter can take it to Hasgeek to verify that the EVM has given a proof that the vote has been recorded correctly. When you audit during VVPR, there has to be a public description of all the RID and U, right? So you pick up a VVPR slip, and all the VVPRs can be encrypted using the same key, which you give to the counting station. So the counting station needs to pick up a VVPR slip, read the QR code, decrypt, find the vote from U and W, right? Such that U plus V is equal to W. That's a small computation. And look up the vote and the RID combination on the second bulletin board, right? So do a random sample of a logarithmic number of log n number of votes, and you have got a perfectly verifiable election, right? So, all the proofs, the theorems, and so on and so forth is routine. They can be easily worked out mathematically. A paper can be written, published in a conference. This is what a verifiable election will look like. Whether it should be used, not used, this is possible. A ballot secrecy preserving verifiable election is possible in computer science. Whether it should be used or not, ultimately should be the parliament's call. It's what the society feels comfortable with. So, but this, I hope I have been able to bring out the issues and the complexities of the process. So I'll stop here, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions and doubts, and I may try to answer this.
Great, thank you, Subhashis. That was really detailed and interesting. I do not doubt that there's a large number of questions about both the specific cryptographic elements, but also details of your protocol. I do wonder if, well, let's just start with this. if anybody has any questions, comments, you can either put them in the Zoom chat if you're following on Zoom, or in the YouTube chat if you're following on YouTube, or you can raise your hand if you're on the call, and we'll try to get as many questions as possible. And they're already coming in, but actually, we have Taha Ali, who has joined us. He is based in Pakistan and has been writing on the challenges of...
Yes, I have read his articles, and
yeah,
he
exactly.
quoted our CC report, and hence it was brought to my attention. I read his articles with great interest and dawn.
Yeah, he wrote an article called "How Can We Rebuild Trust in Voting?" And right. I think this is that's actually an article you recommended. So
because he asked exactly the same question, whether verifiable scheme should be used in elections or not, and he recommended that the question should be asked in Pakistan and taken slowly. I think that if I have read his article correctly, that was his recommendation. Right? So I think that this talk is a partial answer to that,
Yeah, but perhaps if Taha wants to join in and give us a couple of comments or some insights into his work, now would be a good time.
Yeah, great.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be here. Thank you for the invite. I'll just start my camera, see if it works.
I'll just close the slides, right? Sharing.
Right. So I'll just give a brief introduction to myself. So I have a background in information security. I did a postdoc at Newcastle University. This is about 6 years ago. And I actually worked on, the project I was on end-to-end verifiable voting. So my supervisor there, Dr. Fong Hao, he had actually developed his own system, which was called DREI. So I came back to Pakistan about 5 years ago. And since then, I've been trying to get some sort of research jump-started on this over here. Because this is a very neglected area, I've found. In fact, this is the first conversation I've found so far in these 5 years where people have actually looked at how to develop this technology for the developing world. Because all these systems, as you acknowledge, you probably know very well by now, they're adapted for Western environments where you have a completely different environment. You have people who are very educated. Everyone has access to the internet. It's a completely different ballgame. So this has been very, very interesting for me. The question I had for you was, you've described 3 protocols. Do you have anything written on these? I would be very keen on getting something and studying these in detail properly and just sinking my teeth into these.
This is my PhD student. He's writing it up and he's changing it every day. So he writes it up and he doesn't like and he changes it. But
right.
I should be able to ask him to send you an interim version.
Absolutely, please. So I'm now getting to the point where I have some access to, I have a seat at the table in government deliberations and the Election Commission. And so no one really knows about this technology yet, but I'm in a position where I'm able to start the conversation. And the report that I cited, the Indian report, that was a very good introduction in the sense I really enjoyed the argument they made, which was that democratic principles.
That's me.
Yeah. That was amazing. That was very nice. And this is an argument that we can relate to. It's something that I haven't seen anywhere else. So I was very, very happy with that. So Pakistan, I don't know if you're following the news, but there are very aggressive attempts to, ambitious attempts, I should say, to deploy electronic voting in Pakistan. And I'm trying to somehow inject some sort of verifiability in some way, maybe not the complete end-to-end cycle, but just some small things here and there, and come up with a roadmap where maybe in 8 years or 10 years, we could have something resembling verifiability, end-to-end verifiability. And we're even trying to address some of the smaller questions, adapt those for the developing world. but it's a very big challenge, and this is no one's looking into it apart from, like I said, you're the first people I've discovered who have even thought about it. So this is a very nice thing.
So, if we, from the depositions, so I am not I must say that I have not interacted with a large number of Indian voters to understand the cultural aspects at all. But from the people who have deposed to the commission, the general consensus seems to be that India needs a DRE. It cannot be a paper ballot based system because, paper
Yes.
ballot apparently poses, you are holding, forcing a person to hold a pen and the person is not used to. So
Yes.
that itself is undemocratic. So button press is apparently good, but that makes it difficult for E2E because, most of the protocols that has come from USA in the cryptographic community are ballot paper based, the E2E systems. So there are very few DRE
Yes.
protocols that are there. So that's why we were trying a DRE protocol, and probably it has ended up being too complicated. It's not an easy thing to do. So I don't foresee an E2E system being used in an Indian election in foreseeable future. It is impossible to even start that conversation. Our election commission is not even willing to listen. So
we're slightly more lucky here, but yes, please go on. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, so I think our limited endeavor has been to say that, okay, keep on using the EVM, which is fine, but just make the EVM protocols up. Do the VVPAT correct, do the counting correct, right, and correlation correct.
Right.
E2E, we will worry about later. Yeah. So that has been the limited endeavor of the commission.
Right.
But for a group like this, I thought that E2E is something that I should introduce.
Right. No, this is very, very good. So, I agree with you in the sense that it is not possible to have an end-to-end verifiable voting system in the near future. The problems are too much, and it's not just the technical problems; it's also the social problems and the political problems and everything. But what I'm keen on is that so we are going to spend. Pakistan is is planning to introduce machines in the next elections or very soon. And we are going to be spending billions of rupees. So that is a huge investment. So at most, what I would like is that we come up with some sort of system which can be easily upgraded to some sort of verifiable. I mean, it should have some sort of upgrade option or something like that, so that if maybe 5 years down the road, we do finally develop a system which is end-to-end verifiable, then it should be easy to adjust. I don't know how. I mean, I agree with you. So what I like about StarVote is that StarVote and even Scantegrity too, that they sort of integrate those techniques, verifiable voting techniques, with your standard VVPAT, and so likewise.
So do our protocol. That's what we also have tried to do. Yeah.
So likewise, there are lots of other things, like you can have attestation techniques for these machines. You can have lots of things. So this is it's an ongoing thing, and
so I'll be very happy to have a separate conversation with you and discuss.
I would be very happy to have this. It would be very, very nice. I thought I was alone in looking at these questions, and I'm glad to see that there's. So I haven't even met anyone who has in this part of the world who has a solid crypto background. I don't have a solid crypto background, but this is very, very interesting. So I would be very keen to have a separate talk later on sometime, and also to join in and view later sessions of this forum, and that would be very cool. So thank you again for inviting me.
Well, thank you, Taha, for coming and sharing your ideas with us, and I think that's an interesting conversation to continue with. Just a reminder again to people who are watching that you can put in questions and comments through the various mediums. We'll try to get through them all. One thing I was thinking while listening to your talk, Subhashis, was there's an increasing sense I find in cryptographic communities that there may at some point in the future be significant challenges to either certain cryptographic primitives, certain hash functions, certain even, for instance, discrete logarithm problem being solved in some way. And I was thinking, could it be interesting to try to make sure that when you are building a cryptographic protocol for this kind of voting system, that future failures in specific primitives would not lead to a historical voting record being exposed? So that is to say that you would the fact that the primitive that you relied on to guarantee the secrecy of the voting, if you had some malicious actor who had collected all of the tallying information, that they could not go back and say, aha, we know that Subhashis voted for this particular thing back in 2020 or what have you.
So, yeah, so in my talk, I use primitives that are computationally binding. For example, I give the hash function and the commitment, right? The particular commitment that I use is a computationally binding commitment. The computational binding property is considered to be a little unsafe in the cryptographic community because it assumes that you won't be able to factor or you won't be able to solve discrete log. That does not work in a post-quantum world. So if you have quantum computing, discrete log is no longer safe, right? So cryptography research is trying to solve the commitment problems and the hashing problem in a post-quantum world also. So this is called a forever safe cryptography, right? It looks extremely complicated to me. I would say unusable at this point in time. So, but as and when you have a post-quantum commitment scheme ready, you can replace the commitment scheme in this protocol with a post-quantum commitment scheme. But yes, I think that all your current scheme like RSA modulus and so on and so forth, they all are based on discrete log assumption that nobody can solve discrete log. So I think even before voting, I think the first thing that goes is banking, the stock exchange. It gives me enormous pleasure to even think of it, right? So they have to worry about the post-quantum thing much before the voting system will have to. But yes, that's a big concern. That cryptography, as we know it today, relies too heavily on computational difficulty, and that is in danger with the quantum computer.
Well, and Suman, I think correctly points out that perfect forward secrecy could address the concerns, and even a weaker form of that, which would be simply making sure that you have upfront unlinkability before the tallying happens, would be sufficient, I think. So there are many ways to skin this cat, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To answer Taha's question, a little bit your question, that there a certain school of thought, and I think I agree with them, that says that if you don't use cryptography and you use a VVPAT system, that is sufficient. Now, I don't know about the sufficiency, but that has got some appeal. What is the difficulty first? The difficulty is that you cannot ever bring the VVPATs in one-to-one correspondence with the electronic votes. You can match them as a set, but you cannot do one-to-one correspondence. And now, if the set does not match, so if your VVPAT, so if the election does not verify, and if your VVPAT count does not meet the electronic count, you have no other option but to do a re-election in the polling booth, which, by the way, India has been avoiding. They just declare the election result. They don't match and they declare the election results. But ideally, you should do a re-poll in that polling booth. So means, so those are the risks of not having verifiable, right? The other risk is a little bit of, the trustworthiness of the custody chain. That if you take this VVPAT in a sack and put it in a strong room and open it 1 month later, how do you know it has not been tampered with? And most computer scientists and cryptographers would think that the VVPAT is, the trustworthiness of the custody chain of VVPAT is the weakest link in the election. But the society doesn't seem to think so. The society is perfectly happy with sealing the sack and putting it in a trunk and sealing the trunk and putting paper seals on it and so on and so forth. So ultimately, in a democracy, if people are happy with it, that is what should work, in my opinion. Right? Ultimately, the electorate should be happy that the election outcome is correct. And, that, whatever be the method, it does not have to be mathematically proved. So, so right now, I ask these questions of the people who deposed to our commission. And they seem to think there's nothing wrong with the sealing the sack and trusting the custody chain. Right? And nobody seems to think that that's a problem. Now, if that is not a problem, you don't need E2E voting. You are good with traditional trunk safety methods.
So just to put this into perhaps a bit of a contention, so when you are doing things, say traditional paper pencil balloting, there's a tendency to pretend that that is not a cryptographic protocol. Now, I think that, in fact, it is. It's just a highly informal and really leaky one, but it's one that is sufficient. And so saying we're not using cryptography is, in a way, a bid to say we're not going to formally specify what the system does.
Yes. I am not sure that whether you can call it cryptography, but it's definitely an administrative process that you don't understand.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, sure. Okay. The word cryptography means specific things.
Yeah. But, so I for one definitely don't understand that what keeps this VVPAT sleep safe. These are very complex protocols. This requires Form 17C, Form 20. The various forms that you need to fill up. This guy signs, that guy signs, and so on and so forth. So if you ask them that at the end of the day, can you prove that this is correct? Nobody seems to answer that question. But they all seem to believe that if you sign up all these forms and you hand out these forms and so on and so forth, and you seal it off, then that's a correct protocol. Now, ultimately, I have come to the conclusion as I'm growing old, I am realizing that correctness need not be mathematical. Correctness is ultimately what people believe in. And if they believe in those forms and the sign and the administrative processes, then so be it. And in this country, people seem to have enormous faith in those processes.
But so there was a comment from Suman earlier about when using cell phones at any part of the voting process, we're opening up to denial of service attacks, signal jamming, and I think we could expand that comment to also just talk about the device itself being hijacked or somehow compromised.
Yes, so cell phone was a loose use of the word. I'm saying any simple device that has got a processor and a camera, and can run an app, and it does not even have to be online. It has to be actually offline, right? So what I'm saying is that if you have a software independent process, just by the very fact that it is software independent, you don't have to design special hardware or software. If the software does something wrong, it will become evident. Your election will not verify. So, why a cell phone or any device of that type? Any microprocessor that you can pick up together with a camera, because that device will not even get to know the vote. Right? It will just collect some information and pass on some information. And if it passes it on wrongly, that will get caught. Right? So it cannot leak any information. So anything that is doing it can make it public without any causing any harm. So the ask from the device is reduced if you use an E2E system, which is verifiable and software independent.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you have to get into a massive process of hardware and software certification, which itself leads to a very complex kind of cryptography. And I think that the problem is largely unsolved.
But
how to certify.
It also eliminates the biggest concern that people tend to have with these kinds
hacking.
of systems, which is exactly that that the device itself cannot be trusted. And there you're just saying we don't care if the device is trustworthy. The only thing we care about is that it can verifiably transmit information.
Yeah.
Sankarshan's comment here kind of brings us back to where we were a moment ago about rituals of correctness. Being an interesting concept, and it makes me think of just in general how faith in any society or any government is very much based on just like, do people feel okay with things? And if that fails to a sufficient degree, then uprisings happen or revolutions or whatnot. So generally speaking, as long as everybody's more or less happy, everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
Suman puts in another question. Aren't we getting there when we require an EVM to provide a good enough pseudorandom number generator and support a high enough quality hash algorithm?
No, really, because you don't. The random number generator in the protocol that I presented is not a part of the EVM. The random number comes from an encryption function or a hash function. You just pick up the randomness from somewhere. So what the EVM is required to do in our protocol 3 is very, very deterministic computation and very simple computation. There is nothing, it is just scanning and recording and passing it on. It doesn't even have to compute a hash function. It just has to compute a commitment, which is sort of trivial to do. And so that is a low order polynomial time complexity. Can be done in a low end microprocessor also. So there is no special ask from the EVM. And I think that in the computer science community, when you design a protocol, you always try to reduce the ask from the hardware. A good cryptographic protocol is one that does not have any ask from the hardware. Though the more interesting question is that what do you do at the back end? Because at the back end, you have to keep all the secrets, because you're giving zero knowledge proof. So you need to have all the secrets at the back end. So there is a lot of security assumption at the back end in that protocol, not at the front end. The front end has to be nothing. The back end, you require enclave computation. You require either secure multi-party computation, which is a cryptographic protocol, or you have to have a regulator put the Election Commission of India's software, backend software, under a regulatory oversight and do some kind of a trusted computing environment with remote attestation. There is no other way. So you have to trust the hardware there. But then the hardware in the trusted computing environment domains have made a lot of progress. And you can remotely check that a software with a pre-computed signature is the one that is running. And nobody has altered or tampered that computer. So companies like Intel and IBM, and they are producing hardware that gives you that guarantee. So that gives you, the regulator, a lot of choice to enforce an untamperable secure computation. I believe that ultimately, at some level, that hardware will be required. You cannot probably do it entirely with cryptography. Some secret keys will have to be maintained. Cryptographic assets will have to be maintained in a trusted computing environment. And I think that the cryptographic community understands it. And they say that, somewhere at the core, at the heart of it, there is a hardware trust that is required. But it is better at the back end than at the front. Getting a trusted computing environment on your smartphone has not happened. It's sort of elusive. But on an Intel server, I think it is, that is running on bare metal. You cannot do it on a virtual machine, but on a bare metal machine with So I think trusted computing environments are possible.
There is an approximation of trust available on smartphones, as we talked about last time, with the inside the SIM card.
Inside a SIM card, I am not entirely convinced because I think the SIM cloning is a problem.
Yeah.
But I think that what you require is something like Intel's SGX, software guard extension. So even that is hacked through side channel, but Intel is coming up with better and better ones.
Yeah.
But so SGX like trusted computing environments are available on the smartphones. These processors also have it, except that Apple doesn't give you access to it. They keep it for themselves. But these also have trusted computing environments that only Apple can touch and nobody else can touch. And they don't expose the remote attestation. But there is no reason why that should not be possible. So I believe that sooner or later, trusted computing environment with remote attestation has to come on smartphones. Otherwise, you cannot beat the privacy problem or secrecy problem at all, ever. Right? So it cannot be done with cryptography. There has to be a trusted computing, verifiable trusted computing environment in your cell phones. And it is there on the big servers, but it has to also go on the cell phones.
Yeah. I'm not seeing any more questions. I think maybe we do one last ask if anybody has any comments to make. Speak now or forever hold your peace. I do think compared to last week we were talking about like laying the groundwork a lot for this session.
More down to earth things, and this was too technical, I guess.
This was very technical, and I'll admit, like I've been thinking about these things and reading about these things for many years, and yet I struggled a little bit at parts. So I'll have to go back.
Sorry about that, but I couldn't figure out a way to do the cryptographic protocol without the cryptography. So what I'll do is that I'll mail the slides to Sankarshan, and if there are questions, I can always take them on an email. Right, I'll be happy to answer.
Absolutely, and I think at least for myself, I expect some others might feel the same way. What you're presenting, it isn't necessarily intractable to think about. It's just it takes a while to process afterwards.
Yeah, you need familiarity.
Yeah, exactly. So if that is all, maybe I'll just thank you for an excellent session. It's been very, very informative and given me a lot to think about. So I'll if you want to make a final comment, Subhashis, otherwise I'll hand over.
No, I'm good. I think Sankarshan has an announcement.
All right. Yes. So Sankarshan.
Yes, I did get nudged to announce next week's session, but I'll come to that. I know we have gone longer than usual, but I think this was required. And I know we are framing this session as technical, but I also think that to be able to understand the topic correctly, we need this foundation and we need to process this over a period of time to be able to understand and examine issues arising out of technologies being introduced ad hoc into election. And as Taha points out, it's not just India, right? Across the subcontinent and in other places, there is this great fetishism around technology solves everything, especially when it comes to electoral democracy. So I think this is a conversation that will continue. So a couple of things that I wanted to line up. One is we are going to have more of these sessions, and we are looking for two things. One, feedback, obviously. The other thing is if any of the participants, both here and on the YouTube stream, feel that we should include other experts from various domains, please do reach out to us, and we will sort of build our network and have conversations that are equally enriching. Because when we learn from experts and when we share ideas, we will be able to understand this topic in more detail. So that's one. The second thing is, please join the Telegram group for Karana. Even though sometimes it's silent, there are days when there's a whole lot of discussions. So that was the second pitch. The third one, of course, is the session that's coming up next week, same time on Saturday. We will be talking with Kannan, who is going to provide us with an interesting concept of how it all works out in the field. Let's say you are actually a returning officer or involved directly as an administrator in an elections. How does all of that work out? What are the challenges? What are the guidelines that they receive? And so forth. I'm not going to do anything more than provide that teaser. Please look out for the announcement of the talk that's coming up. And I would hope that all of you will be able to make time next week. Of course, Saturday afternoons and evenings are very precious, but you still chose to be here. We deeply appreciate that. The transcripts for these two sessions would be posted as soon as we can get through it. And that provides a basis for a lot more other conversations that will spring about. Thanks again. Zainab, if I have missed anything, please do sort of unmute and participate. All right, we are good. So I guess that's it. That's debatable, but we'll see. But okay, so am I supposed to stop the recording, or does that get handled by Rishwan?
We can that gets handled, and yeah, we can leave.
All righty. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Right. Bye, everybody, and thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Subhashis.